Pre-reading questions. 1. Who is your favorite character? 2. Which character do you love to hate the most? 3. Make a list: a cartoon character, an ugly character, a funny character, a hero, a scary character. Mr. Duffy's workshop. Grandfather wanted George to go to Mr. Duffy's house to collect a present. The present was for George's little cousin, Sally. Mr. Duffy phoned this morning. Grandfather told George. He's finished. Would you mind going now? George didn't mind going at all. He loved to go to Mr. Duffy's house at any time. He loved talking to Mr. Duffy about his work. Most of all, he was fascinated by Mr. Duffy's tools. A few minutes' walk brought George to a tall house. He knocked on the old wooden door. After a few moments, Mrs. Duffy opened it. "Come along in, George," she said. "Mr. Duffy is in the workshop." She walked ahead of George along a short passageway and stopped at the open kitchen door. George caught a glimpse of bowls of plums and peaches on the kitchen table. A delicious smell of simmering fruit wafted past his nose. Mrs. Duffy pointed to an open doorway, where bright sunlight fell across the single step. "You know your way, don't you, George?" George nodded. "Thank you, Mrs. Duffy," he said. George stepped into the small courtyard, brilliant with flowers cascading in streams of white, pink and crimson from pots on the windowsills. In one corner a peach tree drooped its branches, laden with golden fruit. Near the tree, a door stood open. George crossed the courtyard and stepped inside Mr. Duffy's workshop. This was one of George's favorite places in all the world, and Mr. Duffy was one of his favorite people. Mr. Duffy was leaning over his workbench. On the wall beside him, clean but well-used screwdrivers, chisels and pliers of varying sizes were ranged in neat racks alongside hammers and saws. Rows of tiny paint pots and varnish stood on narrow shelves with fine, delicate brushes in long plastic boxes and pots of screws and nails. Mr. Duffy's glasses were perched on the end of his nose and he was looking carefully at a thick piece of wood. He ran his long fingers gently over the surface. He was frowning a little with an air of concentration. He scrutinized the wood for a few seconds, then he stood up straight with an expression of satisfaction. At that moment, he noticed George and turned towards him with a welcoming smile. The most striking thing about Mr. Duffy was that he was extremely tall. The second most striking thing was that he was extremely thin. This always surprised George, as he never came to the house without smelling something delicious cooking on the stove. He wondered how Mr. Duffy stayed so thin when so much tasty food was produced from Mrs. Duffy's kitchen. Mr. Duffy peered at George over the rims of his glasses. He had a large nose above a pointed chin and a broad forehead with thick dark eyebrows. His short, graying hair stood straight up from his head. He seemed to George like a wise old bird, sharp-eyed and thoughtful. He always wore a long blue apron which made him look even taller and thinner. In the pocket was a short pencil, which he sharpened from time to time with a tiny penknife. "Hello, George," said Mr. Duffy. "Hello, Mr. Duffy," replied George. Mr. Duffy beckoned George to a table against one wall. This was the table where Mr. Duffy put finished pieces of wonk. There was a large, polished box made of gold-colored wood and a small round table with intricately carved legs. Beside the table was Sally's present. It was a small wooden boat. Across the middle of the boat were 3 little benches, and each bench had 3 holes in. In each hole was a small round wooden sailor with a blue body, a round head and tiny sailor hat. They looked as though they were sitting on the benches. Mr. Duffy lifted out one of the sailors and showed it to George. The sailor had dark hair, rosy cheeks and a curly moustache. He was winking in a very cheeky fashion. George laughed. He looked at the other sailors. All their faces were different. Some were old and some were young, but they all looked friendly and cheerful. George grinned at Mr. Duffy. "Sally's really going to love this," he said. "Answer these questions. 1. What did grandfather want George to collect? 2. Why didn't George mind going to Mr. Duffy's house? 3. What did George see on the kitchen table and what did he smell? 4. What things were growing in the courtyard? 5. What things were in Mr. Duffy's workshop? 6. What was Mr. Duffy doing when George went into the workshop? 7. What was Mr. Duffy like? What did he wear? 8. How did he seem to George? 9. What 3 objects were on the table? 10. What was Sally's present?
Listen and read. Laura, Hampton isn't a big industrial town, but there are some factories here and the oldest is Larkin's Leather. It was founded by Alfred Larkin in 1859. Jack, today we're talking to Sally Cooper, who works at the factory. Sally, do you like working at Larkin's Leather? Sally, yes, I do. It's a very friendly company. Laura, what does the factory make exactly? Sally, we make all kinds of high-quality leather goods, boots, shoes and sandals, suitcases, briefcases, handbags. Jack, what are you making at the moment? Sally, I'm helping to make some belts. I need to be very careful because the belts are for a top designer. Jack, how many people work here? Sally, there are 50 of us in the machine room. It's very noisy. Jack, do you work long hours? Sally, yes, we do, but I don't mind working hard. Laura, are you planning to stay at the factory, Sally? Sally, well, I enjoy working here, but I've decided to go to college. I want to study design and I've managed to get on a course which starts next September. Jack, well done. Good luck with that. Sally, thanks a lot. I'm looking forward to trying something new. Answer these questions. 1. What is Sally helping to make at the moment? 2. Why does she need to be very careful? 3. What has she decided to do? 4. What does she want to study? 5. What has she managed to do?
Across. Alongside. apron, ascend, beckoned, belts, benches, beside, boots, bowls, branches, briefcases, brilliant, laughed, lean, leaning over, leather, lifted, machine, managed to, mind, moustache, nails, neat, nodded, nose, broad, brushes, carve, cascading, celebrate, cheeks, cheeky, cheerful, chin, chisels, collect, college, company, concentrate, passageway, peaches, peered at, penknife, perch, laden, pliers, plums, pocket, pointed to, polished, pots, present, racks, concentration, courtyard, crescent, crimson, curly, decided, delicate, delicious, descend, design, designer, doorway, droop, educate, ranged, rims, rosy, rose, sailor, sandals, satisfaction, saws, screwdrivers, screws, scrutinize, knocked on, separate, sharpened, exactly, expression, extremely, eyebrow, fascinated, fashion, favorite, fingers, forehead, fortunate, frowning, gently, glimpse, golden, sharp-eyed, shelves, sills, simmer, smell, stepped into, stove, straight, streams, striking, suitcases, sunlight, surface, tasty, graying, grin, hammers, handbags, high quality, illustrate, industrial, insulate, intricate, intricately, kitchen, thick, tiny, tools, trying, varnish, varying, waft, winking, wooden, workbench, workshop,